Located in northeastern Africa, the country of South Sudan has rich grasslands and rainforests that are home to many species of wildlife. The dominant physical feature is the Nile River, which flows northward through the center of the country. South Sudan is bounded on the north by Sudan, on the east by Ethiopia, on the south by Kenya, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and on the west by the Central African Republic. The capital is Juba. Area 248,777 square miles, 644,329 square kilometers. Population, 2020 est. 13,359,000. Until 2011, what is now South Sudan formed the southern portion of the country of Sudan. It was governed as part of Sudan when the Egyptians and the British took control of the region in the 19th century, and it remained part of Sudan when that country became independent in 1956. The northern and southern parts of Sudan developed differently, however, and were home to different cultures. The people in the north generally accepted British rule relatively quickly, while those in the south resisted longer. As a result, the British invested their resources in modernizing the north but in maintaining order in the south. The south thus lagged behind the north in development. This disparity continued when Sudan became independent. The people of the south were mainly from African cultures who tended to adhere to Christian or traditional African religions. The north's population was predominantly Arab and Muslim. The people of the south were long at odds with Sudan's authoritarian government, which was controlled by Muslim Arabs from the north. The country was racked by two long civil wars, in 1955–72 and 1983–2005, fought between southern rebels and the government. The wars led to famine in the south and the displacement of millions of people. As part of a peace agreement signed in 2005, Southern Sudan held a referendum in January 2011, and the people voted overwhelmingly in favor of establishing their own country. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan came into existence as an independent country. Land and climate. Much of South Sudan's land consists of plains. In the west, the flat upland terrain is marked by isolated hills that rise abruptly from the plateau. In the south, along the border with Uganda, there are massive mountain ranges with peaks rising to more than 10,000 feet, 3,000 meters. The Imatong Mountains contain Mount Kinyeti, which at 10,456 feet, 3,187 meters, is the highest point in South Sudan. The east-central portion of the country is dominated by the Nile River and the clay plain that it drains. In the center of the clay plain is one of the largest swamps in the world, a region known as Al-Sud. The Nile rises from Lake Victoria and crosses Uganda before entering South Sudan and flowing northward into Sudan. The river is known as the Mountain Nile where it enters South Sudan and as the White Nile in the northern part of the country. All the other rivers and streams in South Sudan flow into or toward the Nile. With a tropical climate, South Sudan generally has annual high temperatures in the mid-80s to the mid-90s F, low to mid-30s C, though some areas in the north are hotter. The annual low temperatures range from about the high 60s to high 70s F, low to mid-20s C, in the center and north of the country, while the outlying areas are slightly cooler. South Sudan has a rainy season and a dry season. Most rainfall occurs during the summer. Precipitation varies across South Sudan, but the majority of the country receives about 30 to 40 inches, 75 to 100 centimeters, of rain annually. Plants and animals. South Sudan is rich in biodiversity. The savannas in the north consist of grasses and thorny trees such as acacias. In the central part of the country the savannas are more lush, with rich grasses along the Nile that support a large number of cattle. To the south are woodlands and rainforests. Boma National Park, in the east, is home to one of the biggest mammal migrations in the world. The country's large mammals include lions, leopards, cheetahs, elephants, giraffes, zebras, buffalo, hippopotamuses, warthogs, and numerous varieties of antelope. Chimpanzees, baboons, and monkeys are found in the forests. Ostriches, cranes, storks, pelicans, plovers, weavers, shrikes, and several types of partridge are among the bird life. Reptiles include crocodiles and lizards, and insects are abundant. Decades of civil war and rampant wildlife poaching have severely reduced some animal populations. People and culture. Most of the people of South Sudan belong to African ethnic groups. The largest of these groups is the Dinka, who make up about 2/5 of the population, followed by the Nuer, who make up about 1/6. The Dinka and the Nuer are primarily semi-nomadic cattle raisers. They follow seasonal patterns of precipitation. They move their herds of cattle to riverine pastures during the dry season and back to permanent settlements in savanna areas during the rains. In addition to the Dinka and the Nuer, other large groups include the Zandi, the Bari, the Shilluk, and the Eniwa, Anwak. Except for the Zandi, these people speak various languages of the Eastern Sudanic sub-branch of the Nilo-Saharan language family. The Zandi and many other smaller ethnic groups speak languages belonging to the Adamawa Ubangi branch of the Niger-Congo family of languages. The country also has a small population of Arabs, who speak Arabic. English is the official working language and the language of instruction used in schools. Christians, primarily Roman Catholic, Anglican, and Presbyterian, account for about 3/5 of the population. Christianity is a result of European missionary efforts that began in the second half of the 19th century. Most of the rest of the people follow traditional animist religions, and some are Muslim. The population of South Sudan is overwhelmingly young, with most of the people under age 25. As a whole, the country has a relatively low population density. The largest concentrations of people are found along the Nile and its tributaries. Most of the population lives in rural areas. Many settlements are clustered along watercourses because of problems of water supply, especially during the dry months. The major cities and towns include Wau, Malakal, Yei, Yambio, and Juba, the capital. Decades of civil war took a toll on the quality of life and the welfare of the population. The life expectancy in South Sudan is much lower than the world average and is lower than that of neighboring countries. Efforts have been made to improve living conditions, though much remains to be done. Only about half of the population has access to better quality drinking water. Varying ecological conditions, poor hygiene, and widespread malnutrition result in a high incidence of fatal infectious diseases. The most common illnesses are malaria, measles, and tuberculosis. Meningitis and cholera also occur. The infant mortality and maternal mortality rates in South Sudan are among the highest in the world. During the long wars, many southern Sudanese were deprived of the opportunity for an education. Fewer than 1/3 of adults in South Sudan can read and write. Even amid efforts to increase educational opportunities, many school-age children do not have access to education. Higher education in South Sudan is provided by several institutions, including the University of Juba, founded 1977, in the capital, the University of Bahr el Ghazal, 1991, in Wau, and Upper Nile University, 1991, in Malakal. Economy. South Sudan is among the poorest and least developed countries in the world. The majority of its people depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. The main crops that farmers grow to feed their families are sorghum, corn, maize, and cassava, with smaller amounts of millet and rice being grown in some areas. Peanuts, ground nuts, are the primary cash crop. The raising of livestock, including cattle, goats, sheep, and camels, is also significant. Gum arabic, which is obtained from acacia trees, is an important agricultural export. It is used in the production of adhesives, candy, and pharmaceuticals. It is known as gum Africa in South Sudan. Manufacturing has been limited, in part because of the civil wars and shortages of raw materials and skilled labor. Some beer, soft drinks, sugar, flour, and other food products are made. Petroleum is by far South Sudan's most important natural resource, though the infrastructure needed to transport the oil passes through Sudan. Although oil was first discovered in the southern region of Sudan in 1977, the civil wars prevented the exploitation of the deposits until the end of the 20th century. Oil then became the South's chief export. Other known resources include marble, mica, and uranium. The service sector is smaller but experienced some growth in the early 21st century. In addition to trade, it consists mainly of government activities and small businesses such as shops and restaurants. The underdeveloped transportation system has seriously hampered economic growth, so expanding the system has become a government priority. The vast majority of the roads are unpaved, and in the rainy season many of them are impassable. A paved highway was built between Juba and the town of Nimule, near the Ugandan border, in 2012. A railway transports freight between Wau and Sudan. The rivers, particularly the White Nile and its tributaries, are important transportation links. Ports include those at Juba and Bor, located on the mountain Nile, and at Malakal, on the White Nile. The country's busiest airport is at Juba. Other heavily used airports include those at Malakal, Rumbek, and Wau. Government and history. What is now South Sudan was governed as part of Sudan starting in the 19th century. From 1898, the British ruled the entire region, generally in partnership with Egypt. The British quickly pacified the north and began introducing modern improvements. In the south, however, resistance to British rule was more prolonged. The administration there was confined to keeping the peace rather than making any serious attempts at modernization. After World War II, the Sudanese people began to press the British for independence. As a transition to Greater Sudanese self-rule, the British created a Sudanese Legislative Council in 1947. However, Arabic was proclaimed its official language. Since English had long been the primary language of education in the South, using Arabic as the language of government severely limited the participation of the Southern Sudanese. Sudanese independence and civil war. In 1953, Sudan was granted self-government. Ismail al-Azhari was elected the first prime minister. The Southern Sudanese received few positions in the new administration. Fears of northern domination led to widespread discontent in the south. On August 18, 1955, a number of Southern Army troops mutinied. Their rebellion was quickly put down, but some of the mutinous troops were able to escape. They began to coordinate an armed resistance, which became the basis of Southern Sudan's prolonged armed struggle against the North. In 1956, Sudan became an independent country. It was initially a democracy, but in 1958 a bloodless coup instituted military rule under General Ibrahim Abud. His government introduced many measures to facilitate the spread of Islam and the Arabic language, all in the name of national unity. Important positions in the administration and police were staffed by Northern Sudanese. These actions led the Southern rebels to increase their resistance to the government. In 1963 a rebellion erupted in southeastern Sudan, led by the Anya Nya, a Southern Sudanese guerrilla organization. The government responded with increased repression, but it was not able to put down the rebellion. Finally, peace talks led to the signing of the Addis Ababa Agreement of 1972, which ended the war. The agreement gave the South its own legislature and executive body to govern the region. Meanwhile, after a brief return to democracy, another military government, led by Colonel Ghaffar Mohammed el-Nimeri, had come into power in 1969. Muslim fundamentalism had also grown considerably stronger in the north over the years. Nimeri took an increasingly dictatorial approach to governing. He repeatedly dissolved southern Sudan's regional legislature as well as the national parliament and imprisoned many who opposed his rule. In the south there was widespread discontent with the Nimeri regime. In 1983 civil war broke out again with even greater ferocity than before. Later that year Nimeri elicited further ire when he modified Sudan's legal codes to bring them into accord with Islamic law, the Sharia. Nimeri sought to crush the southern rebels by military force. His deployment of the Sudanese army only succeeded in disrupting the distribution of food. When coupled with drought and diminished harvests, this disruption created widespread famine in southern Sudan. Nimeri was overthrown in 1985. In yet another military coup, Lieutenant General Omar Hassan Ahmad al-Bashir seized power in 1989. He and his colleagues continued to Islamize the country. They also ruthlessly imprisoned hundreds of political opponents and vigorously continued the war in the south. However, the southern rebels gained control of many southern towns. Unable to defeat them in battle, the government armed and unleashed an Arab militia against their traditional African rivals in the south, principally the Dinka. It also consistently ignored pleas for food and obstructed the efforts of Western humanitarian relief agencies. Countless South Sudanese fled to northern towns and cities or sought sanctuary in Ethiopia. In 1993 the country transitioned to civilian rule, but Bashir was appointed president. He was elected to the presidency in 1996 and was re-elected in 2010. Meanwhile, the civil war continued to rage. After numerous failed ceasefires, agreements, and peace discussions, The war was finally ended when the rebels and the government signed the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, on January 9, 2005. By then, more than 2 million people had been killed and some 4 to 5.5 million people had been displaced since the fighting had resumed in 1983. Transition to Southern independence. The CPA provided for a new national constitution and outlined new measures for sharing power, distributing wealth, and providing security in Sudan. It also allowed for a separate administration for southern Sudan and stipulated that a referendum on independence for that region would be held in 6 years. Equally significant was the ruling that Sharia law would apply only to Muslims, even in the north. The disputed ABI border region was to be jointly administered by the north and the south until its final status could be determined in a referendum. The southern rebel leader John Garong became president of the semi-autonomous government in southern Sudan, but he died a few weeks later. He was succeeded by another rebel leader, Salva Kiir Mayardit. Thousands of refugees who had fled from southern Sudan during the war returned to their homes, especially in the run-up to the referendum on southern independence. After years of planning, southern Sudanese citizens began voting in the week-long referendum on January 9, 2011. Nearly 99% of voters opted in favor of seceding from the north. Southern independence was scheduled for 6 months later. Preparations for the South's secession did not go smoothly. Several key matters remained unresolved, such as the sharing of the country's oil wealth, the distribution of its collective debt, and the establishment of the final border demarcation. In April, a draft was released of the new transitional constitution for southern Sudan for when it became independent. It drew criticism from several southern Sudanese opposition parties for extending the term of the current southern Sudan president. It also angered the national government for laying claim to the disputed ABI region as part of the new southern country. The referendum on who would control the small oil-rich region of ABI had been postponed indefinitely, and its status remained unsettled. In May, Bashir had the army invade the region's primary town, also named ABI. The following month an agreement was reached that provided for a new, temporary North-South administration of the ABI region, with Ethiopian peacekeeping troops agreeing to form an interim security force for ABI. Despite these problems and the ongoing challenges facing the South in building its infrastructure, developing its economy, and raising the standard of living of its people, it declared its independence as scheduled. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan became a new country, a republic with a two-house legislature. Salva Kiir Mayardit, who had been president of the Southern Sudan Semi-Autonomous Region, became the country's first president, the head of state and government. In the years following independence, ethnic violence escalated in the new country. The government had to deal with rebel activity from several groups, which was closely related to ethnic divides. The country descended into civil war in December 2013, after gunfire erupted in Juba between troops loyal to President Kiir and those loyal to his former vice president, Riek Machar. Kiir accused Machar of attempting a coup. Although Machar denied the coup allegation, he soon emerged leading a force of rebel soldiers and called for Kiir to step down. Tensions were ignited between Kiir's ethnic group, the Dinka, and Machar's ethnic group, the Nuer, and violence quickly spread to the civilian population. Fighting intensified, and both sides were accused of having committed human rights abuses. By the end of 2014, the fighting had left at least 10,000 people dead. Some estimates were considerably higher than that. In addition, more than 1.9 million people in South Sudan had been displaced by the violence. Several ceasefire agreements were signed, but they were quickly broken. Under growing pressure from the international community, Kiir and Machar signed another peace deal in August 2015. The agreement provided for a transitional unity government that was meant to end the conflict. But, as with previous agreements, both sides violated some of the terms, and fighting continued. The transitional unity government was eventually formed in April 2016. As part of the peace deal, Machar was sworn in as first vice president. By July, however, the new government had collapsed as fighting resumed in the capital. In May 2017, Kiir announced a unilateral ceasefire in an attempt to restart peace negotiations. Under a power-sharing agreement reached in August 2018, the transitional unity government was to be reinstituted by May 2019. The date for the formation of the unity government was later extended by 6 months. You can subscribe to support our channel and turn on the notification bell to be notified of new videos.